In this video, we're going to talk about parallel lines and transversals. So a transversal line, if you look in this picture over here on the side, is this line going through two parallel lines. So transversal cuts a parallel line at a certain angle. So some angles that are created are corresponding angles, and those would be angles that are in the same location. So if you look in this corner, there's 4 angles right here, and it's in the upper right corner. So in this upper little section, the 2 is also in the same location. So those are corresponding angles. So if two parallel lines are cut by this transversal line, then the pairs of corresponding angles, so angle 2 and angle 6, are congruent. So we can say that angle 2 is congruent to angle 6. So in our example down below, if you see the 120 degrees already drawn in the picture, that there are 3 other angles that are also 120 degrees. You have to remember that we also know that vertical angles are congruent, and now we know that these corresponding angles are also congruent. So with our 120 here, that means our 4 is a vertical angle, so that is also 120 degrees. And that's because they are vertical angles, and vertical angles are congruent. And then next, this 120 degrees is congruent with this 5 because they are corresponding angles like we set up above. So angle 5 is also 120 degrees. And lastly, we can say 8 is also going to be 120 degrees for 2 different reasons. It's corresponding with the 4, or we can say it's a vertical angle with angle 5, and therefore it's going to be congruent to both of those. So it'll be 120 degrees. So I have both of my reasons on here. So it's a vertical angle with angle 5, or we could say it's corresponding, and that's why it's congruent, so that because it's corresponding with angle 4. So next there are 3 more, and they're very similar. Next we have different sides of the transversal line. So anytime you see alternate, like these next 2, it's because the angles are on opposite sides of the transversal line, so it cuts them so that they're on one on each side. The interior then is because it's between the 2 parallel lines. This next one is exterior because they're outside of the 2 parallel lines. So this last one is interior because they're between the 2 parallel lines, but if you notice, they're on the same side. So sometimes you see the word consecutive with that, sometimes you'll see same side instead of it. So with the first 2, angle 4 and angle 5 are going to also be congruent. With the alternate exterior angles, so our angle 1 and angle 8 over here, will also be congruent. But this very last one, if you look at it, that you can tell that the angle 3 is more of an acute angle and angle 5 is an obtuse angle, so they're definitely not congruent, but they are going to be supplementary. So remember, when you set up an equation with supplementary angles, you need to add the 2 pieces together, so add the 2 angles together to equal 180 degrees, and then you can combine like terms and solve for your variable. Alright, so these 2 questions I'm going to help you out with, and then the next 2 questions you're going to try out on your own. So this very first one is a very common question, so that's asking us, if they give us that measure of angle 8 is 110 degrees, we need to find all of the other missing angles. So I'm going to talk us through each of the questions first. So if angle 8 is 110 degrees, we know that angle 5 is a vertical angle, so that's also 110 degrees. And then because our angle 1 over here is corresponding with angle 5, so in the same location, so upper left corner, that angle 1 will also be congruent to it, so it's 110 degrees. And then for an angle 4 down here is a vertical angle with angle 1, so the 110, or we could say it's also corresponding with our angle 8, and so angle 4 will also be 110 degrees. So then you have to find out what the other angle will be, and if you notice, they're going to be the same numbers, but if you remember, on angle 6 and angle 8, those are called a linear pair, or they're supplementary, so we can add them together to equal 180 degrees. So when we solve this, we'll end up getting that angle 6 is equal to 70 degrees. If we use the same process as we did with 8, 5, 4, and 1, we know that 7 is a vertical angle with 6, so it's also 70 degrees. 7 and 3 are corresponding angles, so whatever 7 is, 3 is also the same, so it's also 70 degrees. 2 and 3 are vertical angles, we know that 2 will be the same as 3, and we know that that one is already 70, so 2 is also 70. Or you could say that 2 and 6 are corresponding angles, so we know that those will be the same. Or one of the other things we just talked about on the last page, 2 and 7 are alternate interior angles, so we know that whatever 7 is, 2 will also be the same. And there is my list of all the angles that we listed out. So for the next one, we're solving for x, and if you notice, 4 is a different color than the other 2 in blue, and that's just because 4 is like one of our measurements up here. So 4 is just the name of that angle. So if we have this is 115 degrees, we can do a couple different things. We know that the angle over here is the alternate exterior angle because they're on opposite sides of this transversal, but they're outside of the parallel lines. So this is also 115. We also know that 4 will also be 115 degrees. And that's because this 115 and our 4 are vertical angles. So now we could do two different things. We could use the 2 on the inside, and those are the consecutive interior angles. We know that those will be supplementary. Or we can use that this 105 and this outside angle 115 will be a linear pair, so those will also be supplementary, so we can add them to be equal to 180. So when we solve this, we can add the 115 and the 5 together. Then we can subtract the 120 from 180, which gives us 60 degrees then for our value of x. All right, so these next two questions are very similar to the last ones, and I want you to go through and solve them yourself, and then come back and check your answers. All right, so the very first one, if we know that angle 1 is 105 degrees, then we know that angle 4, angle 5, and angle 8 will also be 105 degrees. For the angle 4, we know that angle 4 is 105 degrees because it is a vertical angle with our angle 1. And we know that vertical angles tell us that they're congruent. Next is angle 5 is 105 degrees, and that's because it's corresponding with our angle 1, so corresponding angles are congruent. And lastly, the angle 8 is 105 degrees because it is corresponding with our angle 4, or we could say it's a vertical angle with angle 5, or we could also say that it's alternate exterior angles with angle 1. For the next question, if measure of angle 3 is 68 degrees, and our measure of angle 8 is 2x plus 4. We know that those are on the same side and they're exterior, but there's no official name for that, so we have to find something else first. So we could use the 68 and note that the angle 4 has to be the supplement with it, so that that one we could subtract from 180, or we could say that 68 will be the same as our angle 7 over here. That's probably the easiest thing to do, is find the ones that are congruent, because then with our angle 7 and angle 8 over here, so 68 and 2x plus 4, we know that those are supplementary. So when you add your like terms together and solve for x, you get x equals 54. All right, this one we are going to do together, and then the next one you're going to be doing on your own. So it says that when sunlight enters a drop of rain, different colors of light leave the drop at different angles. You can kind of see that with your rainbow. This process is what makes a rainbow. For violet light, so you can see the little droplet right here in the purple range, angle 2 is 40 degrees. And we want to figure out what is the angle 1 measurement going to be, and how do we know that? Well, if you think about it, these are the two parallel lines. We know that a transversal line goes through the two parallel lines, and these two corners are called alternate interior angles. And if you remember, alternate interior angles are congruent, so that means that the measure of angle 1 is equal to 40 degrees. And the reason why is because alternate interior angles are congruent. All right, so these two questions you're going to work out on your own, and one hint I want to give you on this very first one is you want us to think of these as two separate pictures, because if you think of them together, you might get confused and think you can take your angle 1 to help you out in angle 2, and that's not the case. You just have to use the side-by-side angles right here. And same thing down below, you can only use the side-by-side angles, so you want to think of those as two separate equations you're going to use and look at two different halves. All right, so work out your question, push pause, and then you may check your answer when you're ready. All right, so in the first one, angle 1 and our 90 degrees are supplementary because those are not corresponding, they are consecutive interior angles because they're on the same side and inside your parallel lines. Next, we know that angle 115 and our angle 2 are corresponding angles, so angle 2 will also be 115 degrees. And then if we wanted to figure out the angle 3, we know that angle 3 and this 115 are supplementary because they're a linear pair. Or you could also use the angle 2 and the angle 3 there, knowing that those are consecutive interior angles and those are supplementary as well. So angle 3 is going to be 65 degrees. For the last problem on here, you see that the right angle and the 2x also are creating supplementary angles because those are consecutive interior angles, so we know that they are supplementary. So hopefully you set them equal to 180 when you added them together. And then when you solve for x, x should be 45. And then you can do something similar for up here, the 3y and 3x. Sorry, 3y and 6y. And those two put together are supplementary as well because they're consecutive interior angles. So when you add your like terms together, you end up with a 9y, which will then give us y equals 20 for our y. And sorry, that got a little messy.